People like to believe that survival is the reward. That if someone endures long enough, outlives danger, outlasts rivals, withstands catastrophe, what remains must be peace. We assume that after the decisive moment, after the struggle is resolved, life settles into something gentler, quieter, earned. But sometimes survival is not a gift. Sometimes it is the longest sentence. There are stories that feel complete the moment the applause fades. The cameras leave. The public turns away, satisfied that the arc has closed. What remains, unseen, is not triumph, but duration. Years that stretch forward without shape, without witnesses, without relief. A life after meaning has already been assigned. This story lives there. Not at the beginning, not at the moment everyone remembers, but in the long silence that followed. The public story is brief, almost elegant. A small, fragile principality on the edge of irrelevance. A ruler who modernized it, expanded it, stabilized it. A marriage that looked like destiny itself stepping down from a movie screen and into a palace. A fairy tale told in black and white photographs and rehearsed smiles. History prefers this version. It is efficient. It allows admiration without discomfort. It permits distance. A man fulfilled his duty. A nation survived. A love story, tragic but complete. Nothing further required. But the public story omits the transaction, because nothing in that narrative was free. Power was not simply inherited. It was negotiated, constantly, with larger neighbors, with financial interests, with the slow erosion of sovereignty. Every decision was made with the awareness that one misstep could dissolve the state itself. Survival was never abstract. It was personal, and it was conditional. The marriage, too, carried terms that were never spoken aloud in public. It was affection, yes, but also necessity. Stability framed as romance. Continuity disguised as love. An agreement that preserved a dynasty and reassured a nervous world. What was gained was legitimacy. What was lost was privacy. What was gained was permanence. What was lost was intimacy. The transaction was simple and brutal. To keep everything, something essential had to be surrendered. Not immediately, not visibly, but completely. And for a time, it worked. Then came the fracture. Not the spectacle people remember, but the quiet structural collapse beneath it. The moment after the headlines, when rituals replaced conversation. When grief became formalized, public, ceremonial, and therefore untouchable. Loss did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as order. There were funerals to plan, appearances to maintain. A country still watching, still needing reassurance that nothing fundamental had changed. The ruler remained. The system held. The machinery of governance continued to turn. But something critical did not survive intact. From that point forward, time behaved differently. The years that followed did not unfold. They accumulated. Work became the primary language. Not ambition, occupation. A way to fill the hours without entering the inner rooms where silence waited. Ordinances were signed. Details scrutinized. Decisions micromanaged far beyond necessity. Control replaced connection. The state expanded, modernized further, polished its image. From the outside, it appeared efficient, purposeful, even visionary. Inside, the emotional terrain narrowed. Conversations shortened. Trust became procedural. Relationships grew formal, then distant, then sparse. What could not be resolved was managed. What could not be spoken was deferred indefinitely. Grief, left unprocessed, does not fade. It hardens. The coping mechanisms were not dramatic. There were no public collapses, no scandals large enough to disrupt the narrative. Only habits, patterns, a life structured around absence. Silence became a companion. Not peaceful silence, occupied silence. The kind filled with schedules, paperwork, and the unending repetition of duty. Silence that is never allowed to deepen because depth would require feeling. Time passed. Children grew, but not necessarily closer. Authority does not translate easily into tenderness, especially when the emotional reserves have already been exhausted. Expectations replaced affection. Distance replaced guidance. Successors were prepared in function, not in feeling. Institutions adapted. They always do. Systems are resilient in ways people are not. The principality thrived. Tourism increased. Wealth concentrated. The image improved. And yet, the center remained hollow. What the public mistook for devotion was, in part, endurance. A refusal to reopen life to risk. A commitment not to move forward. Not because moving forward would betray the past, but because it would require vulnerability again. The marble remained unmarked. That emptiness became symbolic without intention. A waiting space made permanent. Not a gesture to love, but a structure built to contain unresolved grief. A reminder that life had been paused, not concluded. Years passed, decades even. From the outside it appeared stoic, admirable, loyal beyond measure. From the inside, it was static. The coping mechanisms became routines. The routines became identity. And identity, once fixed, resisted change. There was no room for softness, no rehearsal for release. Everything functioned, nothing healed. Others paid the price quietly. Children grew up under a gravity they did not choose. A household organized around loss leaves little space for emotional improvisation. Roles harden early. Expectations settle like dust. Successors inherited not only a crown, but a climate, one where restraint was valued over expression, control over comfort. The legacy was not just political stability, but emotional inheritance. The institution learned that survival mattered more than openness, that continuity required sacrifice, that public composure outweighed private repair. Society absorbed the lesson without instruction. This is how strength was modeled. This is how devotion was defined. But psychological strength is not the absence of collapse. It is the capacity to integrate loss without freezing around it. What history calls resilience often looks, from closer range, like avoidance sustained by discipline. What history calls loyalty may, at times, be fear of change disguised as principle. Endurance can be virtuous, but endurance without release becomes a form of self-erasure. This was not weakness. It was an overcommitment to duty in a world that rewarded performance more than presence. A life shaped by responsibility, long after responsibility required that shape. There was no rebellion against fate, only compliance. No dramatic downfall, only gradual narrowing. In the end, there was no resolution, only conclusion. A life that had outlived its defining moment, carrying it forward like an echo that never fully dissipated. A reign measured not by what it achieved, but by what it never allowed itself to become afterward. History closes the file neatly, but some stories do not end. They simply stop being told. What remains is an image, a ruler surrounded by achievement, standing in a space carefully maintained, profoundly orderly, and fundamentally unfinished. A room kept intact for decades, a silence preserved, a waiting that never resolved into arrival. And somewhere within that stillness, the cost of survival continues, quiet, complete, and unacknowledged.